I'd like to welcome Troy Crittle. Troy's our first presenter. Thanks for your time, Troy, today. Troy's currently an invasive species officer with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, looking at training industry biosecurity professionals in feral pig and deer control. Troy's been in invasive species management roles for over 20 years and is going to talk to us today about pig management planning, pig baiting and trapping, and surely a few other things that come up along the way. Troy will be presenting 2 or 3, I think, presentations. Narelle will help you drive from our end, and I'll get Heather or Narelle, if required, to give you an update on timing. But again, thanks, Troy, and I'll leave it to you.
All right, thanks, Rick. I think I can share it from here, mate. Are people able to see that? So thanks, Rick. Look, what I'm going to do today are 3 separate presentations rolled into one. So Heather's asked me to talk generally about kind of sub-regional local feral pig management planning, and just to give you some ideas around how that might work and how you might be able to improve it. As we said, most of what I do is around training biosecurity officers or facilitators. So that's the context of the presentation that I'll give today, certainly at the front. And then the last 2 I'll do, talk a bit about feral pig baiting and get into some detail on that, and some detail on feral pig trapping as well. So talk a bit about feral pig control, feral pig engagement, working with interest groups, some actions that might help you as industry facilitators, and then at the end, a couple of tips you might be able to learn from some of the mistakes that I've made over the years. So we'll get into it. I just wanted to start by showing you a map. So this map's not to point the finger at anybody. This is just to show the context of feral pig control, certainly in New South Wales, which is where I am. So that map, can people see that okay? You can see that, Rick? Yep. So the blue on that is the presence of pigs in New South Wales. Overlaid over the top of that, the red is where 1080 baiting's been conducted. So you can see that there's areas where there isn't much baiting going on. That's not to say that there's not pig baiting, pig control work happening there. What I'm just trying to show you there is that the area that's contained with the presence of pigs is not exactly where all of the control is happening. If you compare that to, say, wild dogs in New South Wales, that's that map, so the same thing. So you've got presence and then control. You can see that the areas of control actually match the population pretty well, or the distribution pretty well. So to me, that says that there is a bit of a disconnect, particularly for people and for landholders in conducting feral pig control. And so I'd just like to just give you a couple of tips of how we might be able to improve that. So that's that same map again. So we've got really well established and effective pig control techniques. 1080 baiting for pigs has been around since the 70s in New South Wales, and we've got a pretty good delivery network as well. I personally know somebody from northwestern New South Wales who in 2 years produced 45 tonne of 1080 pig bait. So there's lots of stuff happening. We've got a good network, certainly in New South Wales, but there are areas where the formal control programs have slowed up a bit, certainly compared to wild dogs. So where's the communication failed, or where's the disengagement? So we're not going to fix that in 45 minutes. Like, you know, there's 20 careers there. So I'll just go through some stuff today that might help biosecurity officers or facilitators in improving that. So I think, just in a nutshell, I think there's lots of reasons why people aren't picking up and you know, pulling the trigger, so to speak, on feral pig control. But there's plenty of stuff we can do, I think, to improve that. So how do we find those triggers for feral pig action? All we can really say is that they're different for everyone in every group. Sometimes they're really tightly held, and in some other areas they might change quite quickly. So one of the things that we do, or I do, is to train biosecurity officers in feral pig control, and there's a great number, like a lot of really good biosecurity officers coming through. and the uptake of that information is generally pretty good. Occasionally, though, you sort of come across a bit of a blockage where you think, well, I'm not sure that person's picked up that message and hasn't picked up what we've tried to teach them. So how do we find those triggers, particularly for landholders? I suppose we could say that some of those triggers, and what I mean by triggers is sort of sustainable change. So taking feral pig control from being something that we just need to do one-off to being as much a part of their day-to-day as marking lambs or planting sugarcane, that sort of thing. So they're different for other individuals. They can be environmental, they can be social, they can be quite intrinsic, they can be slippery, as we said, and they can change in an instant, or they can be really strongly welded on. But the thing I just want to point out is that we really need to understand and deal with pig management on an emotional level and on the social level, as well as make good decisions based on the science. An example of that we see a bit, particularly in areas in the West, is sort of bartering pig hunting for other sort of services. We've had places where people opt out of pig control because they can't get workers if they don't allow them to hunt feral pigs on weekends. So there's a social dimension to pig control. So it's all sort of doom and gloom at the moment. So where to from here, Troy? So I suppose the thing that we can do is just stick with some of those what are reasonably boring pest control principles, I suppose. So we need to work cooperatively in a group, which we know that already. We need to coordinate and act at the same time. We need to use integrated control techniques, and what we say with that is do the worst first. So do the worst thing that's possible for that feral pig population, do that at the start, do that at the beginning. And as Heather spoke about before, meaningful pig control really starts when you've removed 70% of the population. And that is difficult to do, but if we can stick with those pest control principles, we will get there and we will have some wins. So in working with groups, a couple of ideas around management plan templates and actually doing meaningful pest control plans. There's an example there on your screen, which is really just quite simple. It's just a series of tables. It's easy to read. I think if you can do it, it's good to represent it as a map spatially. I think a lot of landholders are quite kind of spatial learners or visual learners, and it helps if you can have a map component to it. But just a couple of other things is that it's important to remember that a plan must inform an action. So what I'd suggest to people, if you're a biosecurity officer or a facilitator or something, give the plan to somebody. If you're getting to a final draft, give the plan to somebody and give it a bit of a test. So look, you're not involved in this, you might not know a lot about it, but does this plan inform what you would do? Does this tell you how you would do pig control and where you would do it and what you need to do? If it doesn't, maybe you need to rethink it and put some other actions in there that are a bit more realistic for your target audience. The other thing I'd say is keep it short. Doesn't need to be longer than it is. Like, you're not writing a book, just keep it short. Avoid jargon as much as you possibly can. There's enough of that in here. Follow those key pest control principles, so coordinated, cooperative, integrated. Have simple messaging in your plan as well. If your goal is for everybody in the group or 70% of the people in the group to bait pigs in January, just state that in there. That's all you need to do. Incorporate simple monitoring and evaluation in your plan. So that might be visits per trail camera per night, something simple like that that's achievable by the people in your group. As I said before, keep it simple, have simple objectives across the plan, whether that's for participation, for control or for evaluation. Just keep them simple and have them smart. So specific, measurable, achievable, timely. So most people would have heard of that. So short answer is keep it as simple as you can, particularly for those local plans. Just a few ideas about communicating with groups of landholders. So just clear communication is the best. Don't make it too complicated. Deliver on what you say you're going to do. If you commit to something, then you need to do it. Working through group conflict can create really strong ownership of the decisions that you have. So don't always be avoidant of group conflict. It can actually work for you in the long run. Be professional. Let's just put the needs of the group before your own. No-brainer, that one. State a clear purpose. Look, guys, I know you're concerned about Parthenium, bushfires, but what we're here to do today is to talk about pig control. We can deal with the other stuff at the end. So have a clear purpose. Thank people for their time. This is just basic meeting stuff. Have good catering. It makes people feel really valued. Some of these things can take time. Like in some of these cases, some of the communities that we go into, like real honest change. So change that people are going to pick up themselves is generational. So it's going to take a long time. Don't worry if it doesn't happen overnight. So hang in there. Am I going too fast? Keep going. So just some tips on gaining landholder participation. So increasing the amount of landholders that are in your group. Relationships are everything and you need to protect those. You don't have to be best mates, but you need to have a good working relationship with those landholders. You can build that through trust, and continuity of the staff is quite important as well. People that, you know, people have been around for a long time and landholders get to know, it always helps a lot. Flood or drought can be useful triggers for action and actually can increase the landholder participation in your groups. And that's certainly one that we had the opportunity to use the last few years with the drought that we've just gone through. As facilitators, it's important to accept that there'll be a range of views from within the landholder group, and you need to have a strategy to address those. And how you address those is by knowing your stuff. You know what the rules are around 1080 boating before you go. Have a plan for mitigating the risks for 1080. Have all of that stuff and be ready and well prepared when you go to the meeting. It's also important to understand the context of the situation. So the situation the thing that you're there for might be only one decision that those landholders have to make. You know, they might be making 6 or 8 decisions on that day, and that's just one of them. Understand the context around the local environment. Is it harvest time? That sort of stuff. I think build a good program. Start fairly small. Start at the right time, and they'll come. I think landholders are really fair, and they'll give you a good go. But don't worry if not everybody that you want to be involved is involved at first. I think it's better to start small and gain momentum as you go. Just some messaging to landholders, so some peer-to-peer communication that you might be able to use. As much as you can, encourage landholders to talk to their neighbours about the impacts that feral pigs have on them. It's one thing me going to them and saying, look, we really want you to control your pigs. It's another thing for their neighbour who they've known for years to actually go to them and say, look, we need to have a talk about this and we really like you on board. I think that works quite effectively. The established control techniques that we've got have worked for a long time, and they still work, and they work really well. And the risks around those can be minimised. You know, it's good that you're concerned about the use of 1080 and about minimising the risks. That's what we want. We want those sort of people doing the work. But we've been doing it long enough that we can minimise those risks effectively. Program your pig control at least annually, but if you need to do it again, do it less than 3 months out from the first control activity, so it's shorter than the breeding period. So if you need to go again, plan to do it again within 3 months. And ground shooting really doesn't reduce the population in a meaningful way or contain the spread. So if you're talking to pig hunters around the place, you know, my kids say that all the time, can't we just shoot them all, Dad? Well, no, you can't really. And the other thing to say is that the good old days are now. Like there'll always be a pig to shoot. There's plenty of pigs around. Don't worry, they're not going to be eradicated. There are ways you can help. You can help us at the moment by having a break for a month and letting us do the control activity and come back and control them when there's only a few. You call yourself a hunter, maybe the opportunity is to get them when there's only a handful rather than when they're like that. And the need for a formal organised control program doesn't reflect on your skill as a pig hunter. All right, so just a few things and a few tips, sort of some of the things that we've learned as we've done them in the past few years. We've done a fair bit of pig control work. It's really easy to overreach. Like don't try and make the project area too large with too many people. You can always increase the size later. It's better to start and have 70% participation within your control group than 10%. So work with those who want to work with you initially and start small and build momentum over time. So don't try and make it too big. Work with willing participants and build momentum over time. Even if it's 2 or 3, that's fine. Use those well-established techniques. Avoid the rabbit hole of doing your own research. 1080 works really good. We've got some really good aerial shooting operators. We know how to integrate those techniques successfully. We don't need every landholder group doing their own research project. I think it takes up a lot of the energy out of the group. Communicate your successes. The other one too is to be patient, grasshopper. Not much changes in 18 months. They're long-term changes, getting people to take on meaningful pig control work, strategic pig control work. Training and learning is cyclic. So as a trainer or as a facilitator, you have to repeat the messages a lot to people who have already been in that group, and also to any newcomers. They need to be trained as well. And showing and demonstrating the control, if you've got the luxury of the time to do that, beats PowerPoint presentations every time. So as much as you can, show people and demonstrate the control activity. Be flexible in timing and scale. Sometimes the control program will be smaller than you think, sometimes it'll be larger. So you need to think about being able to scale it up. If say, large landholder comes on late in that sort of planning cycle, take advantage of droughts or ownership changes or things like that. Not everyone's going to work. Not every project or plan will work. It's tough, so learn to pick your battles, I suppose, is the cranky old public servant's advice. This is one of the last ones on planning, and I just call it do the worst first. As I said before, operation, do the worst possible thing you can do for the pig population. So if the pig population is low in a drought, do the control operation then and use a well-established control technique. Do the worst first. Aim for maximum population impact. And the other part of this is actually get all those difficult conversations. Do the worst conversations first, early in the planning cycle. So whether that's having realistic goals, talking about the use of 1080, talking about what you're going to do where people are reluctant to be involved, or involuntary participation, restricting hunters, that sort of stuff. Get that stuff out of the way early so you know what you're dealing with as a facilitator in that group. So just a quick summary. Some days are diamonds, most days are a grind, like being a parent, I suppose you'd say. Use existing control techniques wherever possible. Do the worst first, as I harped on. Don't expect or promise miracles. Pig control is an ongoing management action, not a one-off. Keep it simple when you're planning and have measurable objectives with simple and repeatable messaging. And always build basic evaluation monitoring into your program and communicate those results. All right. Plan for program sustainability and handover at some point. At some point, as a facilitator, as a biosecurity officer, your goal should be to be able to hand that project over to the local community. And I think that's it.